Hello, everybody. Welcome. Can you hear me? All good? Um, my name is Chris Borowski, and I'm going to be the Parks Program. I'm a Parks Program Officer with the City of Toronto, and I'll be moderating the next group of speakers. This section of Leading the Invasion is the long-term adaptive and innovative management strategies. I'd first like to thank our sponsors for making today happen. Our gold sponsor, the City of Toronto. Our silver sponsors, the Invasive Species Center, Lochner's Vegetation Management, and the Toronto and Region Conservation Authority, and CPRO. And our bronze sponsors, BASF and Corteva Agriscience. Our first speaker today, this is the session Concept to Action, Michipicoten First Nation's Clean Equipment Protocol. Our first speaker, Jessica Zadori from the Michipicoten First Nation. Jessica is an environmental professional experienced in provincial and federal governed terrestrial and aquatic environmental studies and the field programs across Canada. Jessica currently works as a biodiversity coordinator with the Michipicoten First Nation, focusing on blending Western science and traditional ecological knowledge to inform the industry and research projects taking place within the Michipicoten First Nation's traditional territory. Without further ado, here is Jessica.
All righty, let me just share my screen quickly. Okay, you should be able to see that now. All right. So let me get started here. Okay, so thank you everyone for coming to my presentation today, titled From Concept to Action, Michipicoten First Nation's Clean Equipment Protocol, where I'll walk you through our recent field season focused on preventing invasive species. I'm going to do my best to stick within a 15-minute time slot with a short 5-minute question period at the end. So, as Chris so nicely introduced me already, I'll just run through this slide quickly. My name is Jessica Zadori, and I'm the Biodiversity Coordinator with Michipicoten First Nation's Lands and Environmental Stewardship Department. Right now, I'm focused on blending Western science and traditional ecological knowledge to inform industry and research projects taking place within MFN's traditional territory. So I'm just going to use MFN as a short form for Michipicoten because it can just be a bit of a mouthful sometimes. As well, for those who aren't aware, Traditional Ecological Knowledge, or TEK, is the knowledge, practice, and beliefs about the relationship between living beings and their environment passed from generation to generation of Indigenous peoples. Just a quick agenda for today. I'll take you through the main aspects of our project. I'll start with an introduction to MFN, project purpose and overview, expected outcomes, timelines and milestones, deliverables, and then lessons and next steps. So just to provide some context here on where we're located and a background on Michipicoten First Nation. So MFN is an Anishinaabe community, and under the guidance of Creator, our community is focused on walking towards the good life, which is a life of holistic well-being. MFN is a small community located on the northeastern side of Lake Superior, and we have a membership of about 1,300. We have 4 reserves, 2 located outside of Wawa, where our project took place, 1 near Chapleau, Ontario, and another one near Missinaibi. For a small population, most of our membership is actually located across Ontario, but also across Canada and internationally. Just some imagery here of where we're located. You can see the little star there on the northeastern corner of Lake Superior, and then also a zoomed in photo of Gross Cap 49 and Gross Cap 49A, which is the 2 reserves that our program focused on and ultimately managed an area of 35 kilometers squared. So just before I jump in, I just wanted to give a shout out to our funders at the Invasive Species Center, who supported our project through the Invasive Species Action Fund. I encourage our audience to go and check them out online and look into the ISAF funding as well as the Fragmites Control Program. As some of you might be aware, capacity within First Nations communities can be incredibly difficult to achieve. And it's only with the support of our funders that we're able to take a step back from proponent-based work and focus on issues such as invasive species prevention. So to get into the purpose and the overview of our project, obviously the purpose of our project is to prevent the introduction of terrestrial invasive species into reserve lands. And this is done by eliminating the establishment of the invasive species through implementation of an area-specific and MFN-accepted clean equipment protocol, or CEP. So our project focused on finalizing an existing CEP document and implementing it. And ultimately, this project allowed us to purchase necessary washing equipment, specifically a truck bed power washer, educate staff and community members on invasive species in reserve lands, collect data relating to invasive species through active monitoring and equipment washing, and then ultimately complete all of this while executing a blanket prevention measure to address invasive species in traditional territory. So you might be wondering what a clean equipment protocol is, and it's defined within an existing provincial SOP as a document created to help prevent the spread of invasive plants by contaminated heavy equipment through equipment washing. So this is really important as invasive vegetation can spread on equipment through water, mud, and plant material that's contaminated with the seeds of invasive species and is otherwise referred to as unintentional introduction. Literature notes that 96 to 99% of seeds may remain attached to vehicles under dry conditions for nearly 260 kilometers of travel on paved and unpaved roads. So by inspecting and cleaning equipment, following simple guidelines, the risk of spreading invasive species can be greatly reduced. So what inspired MFN's clean equipment protocol? So to start, basically the increased presence of invasive species linked to industry projects within traditional territory is one of the main reasons. Community members have been telling our lands department about changing conditions within their traditional use areas. So obviously this is something we take very seriously. A ton of industry operating within our traditional territory, such as mining, and there's a lack of legislative requirements relating to invasive species for these activities. Further, we find that there's a lack of compliance ensuring that these industries are meeting their requirements for invasive species management. It's unfortunately been our experience that Ontario's ministries do not have a strong handle on invasive species management or compliance that ensure adherence to existing SOPs. So those are some of the main reasons. In addition to prevention over management, MFN's really lucky to be located in an area where invasive species are relatively new. But with climate change, we need to be on top of preventing establishment of these species in the first place in order to mitigate costs and efforts of tracking and removing invasive species in the future. So within our CEP, the following questions are addressed. It's focused on explaining what vehicles and equipment needs cleaning, when inspections should be completed, how vehicles should be inspected, and then how to document and track equipment cleaning. I won't expand too much on these now, just due to the time constraints, but I'm happy to chat after the fact. So just to provide some context into exactly what species we're trying to combat, these are some of the main ones, which you all might be familiar with. Just to speak on a few, giant hogweed is one we've more recently noticed in the past few years and has become a major health and safety concern for our community as the land use is pretty prominent in areas with hogweed. We currently have no documented patches of Phragmites on reserve lands, so this is purely preventative right now. I also just wanted to acknowledge that common mullein and several other of these species can be used medicinally or for traditional purpose, but because of how densely they're populating areas, it's cause for concern for our chief and council. Lastly, I just wanted to quickly talk about bindweed because it's kind of an interesting one. So there's several native types of bindweed as well as invasive types. It's pretty complicated to identify the native versus the invasive. It's also additionally complicated because it is an early successional species that impacts areas and creates matted foliage. So we recognize that the impact of this specific species is largely temporary and likely will die back in a few years, but heavily impacts traditional use of plants in the meantime. So here's just a couple photos for you. On the left, you can see a big patch of common mullein access road that's been used for the past few years for construction projects. And then on the right, you can see an image demonstrating how invasive species can, I guess for lack of a better word, choke out important subsistence species. So in the image, you can see how the bindweed is climbing up a raspberry bush and wrapping around the stems and the leaves. So our goals, I'll just go through the main first one, which is to maintain harmony and balance with Mother Earth to preserve plant resources for the next 7 generations. So much of our work within the Lands Department at MFN is directed by the 7 grandfather teachings, and that's really important for our work at all times. So some expected outcomes of our project, these pretty closely mirror our goals, but ultimately we hope to empower the MFN community to make decisions regarding invasive species management, to weave traditional ecological knowledge and Western science together to develop resources for MFN staff to utilize, expand existing initiatives relating to invasive species to address gaps in prevention, and improve research on the control of invasive species at a local geographic level. So this is our team. We had 3 different departments work on this. We had our Lands Department, our Public Works Department, and our Operations and Maintenance Department. And through working together, we were able to execute this project. So just to lay out some quick timeline and milestones, we completed the project throughout 2024. We followed it stepwise, but I did just want to draw specific attention to documenting baseline conditions. So documenting baseline conditions is such an important step of our process in the implementation of the project. Documenting the baseline is ultimately what allows us to understand what's present and plan for site-specific conditions. It's what allows us to monitor progress over time and determine success of the implementation overall. It also allows us to ensure that wash areas are clear of invasive species, so we're not recontaminating equipment following its wash. Lastly, we're able to tell which invasive species were already present versus which invasive species are being washed off the equipment, which is really important. So this is just an aerial image of a small piece of MFN's reserve lands. This image helps to give spatial context to the location of our wash stations with relation to our community along White Sands Beach. So this is our community, and these are our 2 little wash stations right here. So one's located in proximity to the MFN landfill, which is up here, and the other is located in proximity to our carpentry shop and equipment shop down here. We also work to select sites that were pre-disturbed for this work. So this is a drone image captured of our first wash site. It was previously used for the dumping and storage of blast rock. So it's heavily compacted in the soil, which we thought was a benefit, and is already disturbed, which we were looking for. This is an image of our second site. It also shows similar conditions of pre-disturbance, compacted ground use, and a lack of vegetation. This is a close-up of one of our wash areas. You can see it's relatively simple. It's a temporary wash area. We haven't moved towards permanent implementation yet, but ultimately it's functional. You can see we have some compacted gravel on the ground there, and that's been put into an area that was previously excavated to help with water drainage, so there's not water pooling or anything. And then we also installed some erosion control fencing around the site to stop the migration of invasive species seeds into neighboring natural areas. So, results of our monitoring, to get down to the nitty-gritty of it. Basically, we found that we just need more time before we can truly evaluate the success of the project. We did have some smaller takeaways, though. So we had the limited reestablishment of invasive species at wash areas at the end of our season. We also documented similar species as those documented in our baseline study, which indicates that equipment washing did not bring any new invasive species to the local geographic area. We also had realization that additional monitoring needs to be completed in spring of 2025 following leaf out, just to confirm these findings from 2024. So we had a couple key physical deliverables come from this project. We had a completed MFN-specific clean equipment protocol document that was produced. We also produced clean equipment checklists for several different pieces of equipment, ranging from 2-wheel drive and 4-wheel drive trucks and vehicles all the way to graders and excavators. We were also able to get some training material for staff as well as community engagement materials for MFN. This is just an example of one of our checklists that we use. It's, again, relatively simple but functional. When we wash a piece of equipment, one of these is filled out and it's able to be archived. So just to go through some lessons learned, we had 4 main ones. Most importantly, that we found is that a dedicated team and community can make a difference. And this is important to recognize because not every system is perfect, but making an effort is truly what makes a difference. It could be a really long time before we see measurable impacts from our CEP, but this is a good start. We also saw that industry is willing to adapt and able to implement this. So with clear instruction and some support, it's been our experience that industry has been willing to participate in the process. We found that the inclusion of the CEP and tender documents is a key first step and adds transparency to the expectations that the First Nation has set out. We also found that change is really hard and it just takes time. So this is a behavioral change, and those are always really difficult and require a lot of repetition. We found that no one really enjoys adding an extra step to their day to wash equipment, but changing the culture on construction sites is something that we're going to continue to focus on. Again, we also reiterate that prevention over management is key. Management is laborious and expensive, so we're going to keep focusing and learning from the lessons so far so that we can just focus on prevention. So next steps and goals, I'll go through these really quickly. We have split them into immediate and long-term. So immediate, we hope to continue and expand our implementation. Our CEP has been added to all tender documents. We're going to begin some drone mapping of invasive species hotspots to monitor density and growth over time, as well as the success of future weed pulls. Our long-term goals are to work with the community to determine a permanent location for built infrastructure to be constructed so that we can continue equipment washing. And then lastly, we hope to continue to build community capacity in invasive species identification and citizen science applications. And that concludes my presentation today. I just wanted to thank our funders at the Invasive Species Center through the Invasive Species Action Fund. And feel free to contact me if you have any questions about our clean equipment protocol. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jessica. That was amazing. We do have one question, if we have time. Do you use MFN specific controls different from those used in other parts of Ontario?
They're very similar to the existing SOP documents, however, more specified for the specific locations and the types of seeds that we're looking for. So things like Japanese knotweed we don't really have here, so it tends to minimize our winter controls. So it's just really tailored to the geography and time of year here, if that makes sense.
Excellent, thank you. If anybody else has any more questions, you can put them in the chat, and Jessica would be happy to answer them as she said. And thank you very much for attending this speaker.
Miigwech, thank you.
All right, everybody, we'll move on to our next speaker. I'm pleased to welcome Diana Gora, presenting Claireville's Wetlands, the role of invasive management in ecological restoration. Diana received a Bachelor of Science from the University of Guelph and a postgraduate certificate in ecosystem restoration from Niagara College. She is currently the Assistant Environmental Technician with the Toronto and Region Conservation Authority, having worked on numerous projects with various conservation authorities and nonprofit organizations. Her role with the Toronto and Region Conservation Authority's invasive management and Meadow restoration team continues to build her knowledge of invasive management and post-management restoration. Please welcome Diana Gora.
Thank you for that introduction. Can you see my screen all right?
Yes, you're ready to go.
Okay, perfect. So thanks everyone for joining me. Like it was mentioned, I'm going to be talking to you today about one of our restoration projects and how we've been reclaiming Claireville's wetlands and the role that invasive management has had in all those projects. So just to give you a brief overview, I'm going to go through site background, years 1 and 2, management restoration, and then finish off with what we're doing for this year in future management. So Claireville Conservation Area is a significant ecological site within the Greater Toronto area. It is located in Brampton, Ontario, covering about 848 hectares with a mix of forested land and wetlands in the Claireville Reservoir. It's owned and managed by the Toronto Region Conservation Authority and is known for its rich biodiversity and natural beauty. And the focus of this presentation will be on a restoration project known as the Gora Wetlands, which is circled in red on the map there. So to give you a little bit of history on the site, historical images have shown that Gora was farmland from about the 1940s to the 1970s. And starting in the 1950s, the wetland pockets were beginning to be observed on site. By the 1980s, aerial photos have shown that the site was left to naturalize. And then by the 1990s, the site began to have some development with the parking lot and those buildings. And as you can see, there's some pretty well-defined wet pockets on site. Jump ahead about 30 years to more recent imagery of 2021. And that shows a constructed wetland in one of the pockets on the southeast end. And where the star resides on the screen, it has just become overgrown with a buckthorn thicket. So previous restoration efforts on this site began around 2006 with the construction of that southeastern wetland, seen in the north corner of this image there. And that included the construction of the wetland and a bunch of tree and shrub plantings. And then in 2013, another project was implemented with the restoration of a grass-dominated meadow just north of that restored wetland. And back in 2016, TRCA assessed the landscape for restoration potential using a TRCA developed framework called the Integrated Restoration Prioritization, also called the RIP. And the RIP highlights catchments where restoration will provide the greatest benefit to the natural system based on data collected on natural cover, altered hydrology, aquatic conditions, and terrestrial natural heritage potential. And so based on this framework, project planning began with the goals to manage invasives, increase stormwater retention, increase natural cover and habitat, improve connectivity with the existing cover, contribute to reforestation efforts, and then as part of the grant that was used to fund this project, the last goal was to create habitat for the western chorus frog, which is a threatened species that is found within the conservation area. So the overall project plan was to restore 1.6 hectares of wetland in the overgrown buckthorn area, and then enhance 0.67 hectares of the existing wetland. So TRCA's restoration projects teams created a wetland concept that included 0.9 hectares of new wetlands. So this consists of deep pockets, emergent zones, and tree and shrub zones. Also included 0.7 hectares of riparian zones, several habitat logs and features, and then on top of it all, 2.3 hectares of invasive management, some of which was required to be completed prior to any construction. So our first step, a little video just to play there. Our first step was to manage this buckthorn thicket. And because it was so dense, we were unable to access it for basal treatment, so we had to go an alternative route. And we decided to use a skid steer mulcher. And in January 2023, over the course of about 2 days and a snowstorm, I'm told, a contractor was hired to mulch the site. And this video just shows that mulcher doing the work, with the mulcher loaded on front of the skid steer, grinding down all of the stems to a stump, and while making sure to avoid any native trees and shrubs in the process. And at the end of it all, we were left with a thick layer of mulch. So, looking at it, the project was, looking to be a success, or so we thought. We had a bit of an unexpected outcome based on some conversations we had with others who had done similar work. We had high expectations and confidence in the success of the eradication, but that wasn't entirely the case. A spring site visit to assess the die-off saw some immediate success with a handful of native regeneration of some ground covers and wildflowers beginning to emerge from the seed bank, but not as much as we'd hoped. And then looking at the mulch stumps, a large number of them were actually beginning to sucker. We speculate some of this reduced success might have been just because of the sheer density of the buckthorn stand. It left behind just inches of mulch in some sections that it might have made it harder for new things to emerge in that spring season. So we scheduled a follow-up spot treatment. A foliar treatment of glyphosate was applied throughout the entire buckthorn area in July of 2023. And this resulted in, the results of this spray actually proved to be quite ineffective for the suckering stems. We saw very little die-off, but we did see a lot of success in it, die-off of the saplings. So with speaking to our forestry team, they recommended using a triclopyr product, Garland XRT. And we followed up another treatment in September using a tank mix of XRT and glyphosate. And this applied to the suckering stems proved to be very effective. We had visible die-off within weeks. So the following year is when the big construction, bigger restoration projects started. In March of 2024, over the course of 4 weeks, our construction crew came in and built a series of ephemeral wetland pockets, and as well as installed a number of log tangles and habitat structures throughout the buckthorn site. And within 2 to 3 weeks post-construction, our staff saw a blow up of natural regen. Number of cattails, other wetland plants were beginning to pop up, and wildlife was already making use of the space. On the invasive management side, we continued our management with a second-year glyphosate treatment of buckthorn, but this year in this treatment we just focused on seedlings because there was such a great success with the suckers the year before. But in addition, we also started a perimeter treatment with a basal bark treatment to reduce any seed sources that were coming in from the hedgerows, because the hedgerows were quite dense with buckthorn. On the existing wetland, a failing berm was repaired and regraded it was also regraded to incorporate deeper pockets within the wetland. So initially, invasive management was set to focus only on Phragmites in this existing wetland. But a site visit in that summer had found Japanese knotweed was spreading on the very southern end of the wetland. This just is one of our many challenges of working in an urban environment, because this was likely growing from contaminated fill that had been dumped on site because it was right along the roadside. So we just switched up our management to include a foliar treatment of that Japanese knotweed before it became an established problem. On the Phragmites end, since the wetland's original construction, the Phragmites had spread throughout the entire site. So any Phragmites that was excavated during the wet pocket enhancement, it was buried on site. And then in the fall, with the assistance of the Invasive Phragmites Control Center, the remaining frag was treated with glyphosate. Now, with heavy construction and heavy machinery comes some compaction, and this site was definitely an example of that. Before planting, our planting team could come in and do any work. They had to till some of the areas in advance just to loosen up the soils. And a large portion of our 22 kilograms of native wetland seed that we had was reserved for these tilled and extra disturbed areas. Otherwise, the rest of the seed was spread throughout the newly constructed wetland. And then in fall 2024, TRCA's restoration planting team came in and put in 6,000 stems of bare root and potted stock. I just have the list of the species on the screen if anyone's interested. And those were planted in specific zones of that newly constructed wetland. And following planting, 150 yards of mulch was spread around each stem to aid in the competition, to aid with competition of the surrounding vegetation as everything starts to grow in, as well as help to retain moisture from weather events, because we don't this site isn't regularly watered after it's planted. So I'll just wrap things up with what's to come in 2025. On the buckthorn end, we have reduced our footprint of the treatment from about 1.5 hectares to 0.2 hectares, just to the section of where our seed source is still the greatest. And then we'll be following up a second year treatment of the Phragmites in that existing wetlands, just to catch anything that might have survived the first round. And this year will be the first year of monitoring via TRCA's rapid restoration assessments. So this is a visual survey and assessment that we do 1, 3, and 5 years to monitor the success and stability of restoration post construction, invasive management, and planting. So with that, I want to say thank you. Here's just a little photo of kind of what the project the site was looking like late last year. And I think I have time for questions if there are any, but if not, my email is on the screen.
Great presentation there, Diana. Love the before and after photos. Not enough of those are taken and often forgotten, so they're much appreciated. We do have a couple questions here in the chat. Anonymous attendee wants to know how the herbicide was applied, individual or broadcast.
It was a spot spray, so it was very concentrated.
Follicular, yeah. Excellent. What's the best planting method, in bunches or well spaced out?
It's been a while since I've been a planter, so I don't think it's changed. But we usually plant specifically the shrubs. We plant in nodes of like 10 to 15 for about, I think it's half a foot to a foot apart.
Excellent. Yeah. Is there equal success with bare root versus container plantings?
Ooh, that I cannot speak on. If that person wants to send me an email, I might be able to follow up with the planting team and they might have better answers.
Anonymous attendee who mentioned that, please mention that. What type of budget is for a project like this?
Whoa, that's a good question. Again, I personally don't have the answer to that. Unfortunately, again, maybe someone can email me and I can follow up with my project managers, and because there's a whole bunch of different teams involved. So
Diana's email will be on the bottom of the presentation here as noted. If you want any more questions regarding the budget or follow-up questions, she'd be happy to answer anything she can't at this moment. Somebody mentioned, is there a cat on your desk? And
is there?
then,
Oh no, they're both sleeping. I thought they'd make a.
and then last question, how did you apply the seed and did you use a nurse crop?
It was just hand broadcast. And sorry, what was the second part of that question?
Did you use a nurse crop?
I don't believe so. I think it was just the wetland seed.
Okay, excellent. I don't see any more questions popping in at this time. So thank you very much for presenting. That was a great presentation and learned a lot. And if anybody has any more questions, please feel free to reach out to Diana there. With that, we'll start our next session or our next group of speakers. Perfect. Okay. Welcome, everybody. This session is the Thames Valley Corridor Invasive Species Management in London, Ontario. We have 3 speakers today and one that cannot be here today, so I'm just going to give a quick little summary of what they do. So Linda McDougall is an experienced landscape architect in the Parks Design and Construction section with the City of London. Linda leads a wide range of innovative projects and implements Council's strategic plan, London plan policies, and master plans, including the London Invasive Species Management Strategy. We also have Celestina Daughtry here, who graduated with honors in 2022 with a bachelor's degree in environmental science from Laurentian University. She now works with Spectrum Resource Group. Celestina has been with Spectrum for the last 3 years, initially working as a field technician on the Thames Valley Corridor project. Celestina continues to work for Spectrum as a supervisor overseeing the project. And last but not least, we have Jennifer Davey. She has been with Spectrum Resource Group as a division, which is a division of Right Canada Holdings since spring of 2019. She currently holds the position as project manager, managing the interior of British Columbia for all invasive vegetation management projects, and will be taking over the management of the province of Ontario in 2025 season. Special note to Ashley O, the regional coordinator with Spectrum Resource Group, who can't be here today. So with that being said, I will let the speakers get at it, and please welcome Linda, Celestina, and Jennifer.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, my name's Linda McDougall, and as you mentioned, I'm a landscape architect with the City of London in the Parks Design and Construction section, and I'm really happy to be here with our contractors from Spectrum, Celeste and Jennifer, who were retained for this project through a competitive tender bidding process for a multi-year contract back in 2022. And I understand this is the last presentation of the day, so I'm going to keep it short, and we appreciate everyone being on the call. Next slide. So here's the agenda. We're going to go through. I'm going to deliver the first portion of this, and then we're going to flip it over to Spectrum, who are the boots on the ground doing all that hard work on the landscape. And next slide. So as a recognized leader in invasive species management, the City of London was the first to leverage the Ontario Invasive Plant Council's framework to draft and implement a municipal invasive plant management strategy. And I want to give a shout out to Owen Williams and the OIPC for all their assistance with that process. That document was approved by Council in 2017 and identifies priority species and prioritizes management in significant natural heritage feature, including the Thames Valley Corridor. So it's exciting to circle back to the OIPC conference to share an update on a big piece of the London Invasive Plant Management Strategy implementation, protecting and enhancing the Thames Valley Corridor. Next slide. So the Thames River is both our inheritance and our living legacy, and the river is known by other names by First Nations such as Deshkan Zibi or Antler River. It is our collective responsibility to protect and enhance its shared natural, cultural, recreational, and aesthetic resources. And so the city is leading this multi-year, large-scale invasive species management project to protect and enhance London's Canadian heritage river, the Thames. So this project is also consistent with priorities in Council's strategic plan, the London Invasive Plant Management Strategy, the One River Environmental Assessment, River Management Plan, and the Paddling Plan. So there's a lot of studies and process that led to these documents, and now we're implementing. Next slide. So this project is addressing priority invasive species following OIPC's BMPs that are impacting biodiversity and the ecological integrity of the Thames Valley Corridor, encroaching on the TVP, London's active mobility pathway system. It's impacting safety and sightlines on the TVP, and it's impacting recreational use and blocking views of the Thames River. So views to the river have already been improved after years of being blocked by big walls of buckthorn that stayed green until December and were the first to leaf out in the spring. So it's a real relief now when you're walking on that pathway system that you can see the beautiful river and know the difference that it's making ecologically. Next slide. The objective is to manage and monitor priority species identified in the London Invasive Plant Management Strategy, specifically buckthorn, which was estimated to be about 20% of the tree canopy in London about 10 years ago in the U4 study. So clearly it cannot be eradicated, but it can be managed to protect the natural heritage system and those cultural and recreational values. And also they are addressing Japanese knotweed, dog strangling vine, giant hogweed, and non-native honeysuckles following those OIPC BMPs. Phragmites is also managed across the city primarily by the Invasive Phragmites Control Center in the Thames Valley Corridor and also by the Upper Thames in the environmentally significant areas and across the city following a strategic water-based approach. So big shout out to Janice and Gabby of the IPCC if you're on the call today, and I'm going to show a map about that after the next slide. So this is a map from London's paddling plan that also identifies invasive species work in parks along the Thames Valley corridor. Those areas are contiguous with the river and they're in light green. And there's a high-level timeline in the legend. The dark green areas are environmentally significant areas, and invasive species management in ESAs is primarily done by the city-funded UTRCA ESA team. And shout out and thanks if you're on the call today, UTRCA, all your many years of work addressing those species in the ESAs. So this is a very exciting landscape level project that is protecting the ecological integrity of the Thames Valley corridor and improving quality of life for Londoners. Next slide. So this is the map of the London, the phased approach to managing Phragmites in London that was developed back in 2017 by the London Phragmites Working Group that included many city service areas, 3 conservation authorities, MTO, and that document and map was finalized in 2018. The city-funded Phragmite Control Program began in 2014 and increases in scope every year. Implementation is well on track by the Invasive Phragmites Control Center in 2025, and they're meeting those phase timelines on that map. So as you can see, work along the Thames corridor is scheduled to wrap up pretty much by 2027, which is really, really exciting. I'm going to pass it over to Jennifer from Spectrum. Thanks, Jen.
Good afternoon, everybody. I would just like to say thank you so much for having our company here, and a big thank you to Linda. She has been a huge support. She's fantastic to work with, and we really appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak to the work that we are doing in London. Spectrum Resource Group is a division of Right Canada Holdings. We have 3 other sister companies across Canada: ArborCare, CNUC, and Right Tree Services. We have several service lines, but the one we're focused on today is invasive plant management. And I would like to hand it over to my very hardworking and fabulous field supervisor, Celestina. Thank you, Celeste.
Hello, everyone. So in London, Spectrum is contracted by the city to help protect the ecological integrity of the Thames Valley corridor by performing a forestry level extermination to manage invasive plant species. We have completed an initial treatment in over 65 parks throughout the Thames Valley corridor. To do so, we are using and testing treatment and monitoring strategies according to the LIPMS in collaboration with Spectrum Resource Group and the OIPC. Treatment of these parks involves performing and repeating selective herbicide applications, creating detailed maps of the locations of each specimen or patch, and finally monitoring the population and distribution of invasive plants before and after treatment. We use Avenza maps and Agterra technologies to create maps of all target species throughout the treatment area. The target species in question are here on the slide. On the slide, we can also see a couple of maps of Ross Park in London. The map on the top left is an Agterra map, which shows the buckthorn distribution, and the map on the right shows the location of every other species. These maps are then combined by our GIS department for a more concise look, which can be seen on the bottom. These maps are used in subsequent years to track species distribution and are also useful for follow-up treatments. The primary considerations for this project regarding herbicide application are the proximity to the Thames River itself and the goal of ecological restoration for the area. In order to meet these criteria, Spectrum follows the OIPC's BMPs and uses methods which reduce the potential for river contamination, forest disturbance, and cost in the short and long term. We use backpack sprayers and basil bark application primarily on buckthorn and honeysuckle, which allows us to access and treat the target species without disturbing the area too much. In the photo, the trees on the right side of the path were buckthorn plants, which had been treated a few weeks prior. Once treated, the dead plants are generally left standing in place to reduce disturbance, erosion, and the cost of treatment. In 2024, we emphasized the control and monitoring of Japanese knotweed. In the TVC, there are 78 knotweed patches, all of which have been treated at least once by Spectrum. Each patch is cataloged based on their area, density, and maturity, and they are monitored and retreated yearly. Treatment consists of a repeated foliar application of glyphosate and imazapyr, which has resulted in a significant reduction in patch size and density with each treatment. At our current rate of success, all patches will be managed by 2026. Here is an example of a knotweed patch that has been treated by Spectrum. This patch is located in Horton Park Central and measures just over 30 meters squared. Prior to treatment, this patch was densely packed with mature individuals measuring over 6 feet tall. This patch has been treated 3 times by Spectrum between spring of 2023 and summer of 2024. The after photo was taken just prior to the 3rd treatment last summer, and the trees in the photo were planted last spring by the City of London. Spectrum will return to the site to monitor treatment success and will perform a 4th treatment if necessary in 2025. It is well known that the reproductive rate of buckthorn is very high, but it was once thought to be worse than it truly is. When we started this project, the scientific community was under the impression that buckthorn seed banks remained viable in the soil for nearly 5 years following the removal of a mature buckthorn stand. However, a publication by MJ Schuster in June 2023 suggests there is no evidence for a long-lived seed bank for common buckthorn seeds in naturally occurring seed banks. This article states that the seeds remain viable for only 2 years following the removal of mature stands, and that seed emergence drops significantly in the 2nd year post-removal from 97.9% emergence in the 1st year to only 1.9% emergence in the 2nd year. This is significant to the TVC project because it allows us to focus on new areas rather than revisiting the same parks for 5 years. This new information doesn't change the fact that buckthorn plants do indeed produce a lot of viable seeds and are very good at reproduction. So monitoring and retreatments are still essential, but not to the extent that we once thought. On that note, each of our parks is revisited each year as per the OIPC's BMPs to address any missed stems or emerging plants. In addition to mapping and spraying, Spectrum also has a comprehensive monitoring program, which was established in 2023 and consists of 2 phases. Phase 1 occurs prior to treatment to collect baseline data, and phase 2 occurs 1 year after treatment. The information gathered each season is used to ensure treatment effectiveness and to improve strategic planning for future management efforts for the City of London. Over the course of the past 3 years, millions of stems of priority species have been addressed throughout the 630 hectares of the TVC parkland in accordance with the London Invasive Plant Management Strategy. We treat multiple species in a single pass and take care to minimize off-target contamination while maximizing efficiency. According to our treatment data collected in 2023, the average number of buckthorn stems per hectare was approximately 3,132. In the project area, that comes to approximately 2 million buckthorn stems, all of which have undergone an initial treatment since 2022, sorry, and we're not done yet. In 2025 and 2026, Spectrum will continue our treatment and monitoring efforts throughout the city to help minimize reinvasion. After this time, the City of London will perform periodic monitoring and touch-ups according to the OIPC's BMPs. The city will also be balancing natural regeneration by planting native trees and shrubs to encourage their reintegration into this ecosystem per the OIPC's Landowner's Guide. All of this is in an effort to protect the ecological integrity of the Thames Valley corridor and to improve the quality of life for Londoners. On behalf of myself, Spectrum, and the City of London, I urge you to take action in your own jurisdiction. Together, we have the potential to make a lasting impact on this vulnerable ecosystem and to build a better future for the region. So I'd like to thank you for your time and attention, and we hope to see you out there.
Thank you very much, Celeste. That was a great presentation. Jennifer and Linda as well. Thank you for coming out today. It was a pleasure to listen to that. We'll move on to some questions here that we have in the chat box. First one is, has Spectrum encountered giant hogweed in cow parsnip?
We haven't yet, surprisingly. It is one of our priority species, but we haven't identified it in any of our locations that we visit. So, no.
That is great to hear. The next question, meadow parsnip and wild angelica, your controls on these.
I can speak to that one. We're implementing the London Invasive Plant Management Strategy, and under that strategy, the city very early on in 2017 with the OIPC identified five species, and those are the ones that we're addressing at this time. Well, as much as we'd like to address every single invasive on the landscape in the Thames Valley corridor, unfortunately, we were picking our battles and getting the most bang for our buck with the species that were chosen through that process.
Excellent. Thank you, Linda. What steps are being taken to ensure newly introduced ornamental species don't become future invasive species problems?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, always opportunity for more education, promoting those grow me instead pieces that Vicky spoke about earlier today. Conferences like this, education is a big part, and I think that's included in the London Invasive Plant Management Strategy. So yeah, always lots more opportunity for that. And catching them through this process. Sorry, you know, if priority species are escaping from backyards in this process, certainly, yeah. Anyway.
Any tips on how to convince people or my bosses of why herbicide use is beneficial in such endeavors rather than manual efforts?
I think it was put most eloquently by Janice Gilbert of the Invasive Phragmites Control Center, who said, you know what, we're doing the most amount of good with the least amount of harm. These species are already on the landscape, and it's been proven that, you know what, for efficiency and effectiveness, really, in a lot of cases where you don't have a biological option or the goats aren't going to work for you, you know what, you're looking at following the BMPs by the OIPC that speak to using herbicide.
Very good. The next one is, are there any plans to do buckthorn on private lands adjacent to city property?
Yeah, certainly, you know, we do make things like weed wrenches are available from Reforest London. I think you can go visit them, and I'm not sure what their process is, but they have 5 weed wrenches that you can borrow and go, you know, weed wrench from your backyard. So certainly, yeah, reach out to the city if you need assistance with that. But no, we don't manage typically on private property. And like I said, 20% of the buckthorn in the city, you know, of the tree cover in the city is buckthorn. So we know it's out there, and we're picking our battles and doing what we can on public property. I know in some cases for Phragmites treatment, if a patch of a cell of frag is extending onto private lands, they may get a knock at the door or a letter to say, hey, can we manage on your lands while we're here? Because we know that otherwise that treatment won't be very effective, right? It's just going to reinfest from the private lands. Whereas with buckthorn, we know it's everywhere.
Do you get much pushback or negative feedback from the public regarding pesticides on public lands?
We put really friendly signs up that say ecological restoration, and it has like a butterfly and everything, and it has my extension. And we put those right beside the warning signs that are required for pesticide use. And I get maybe 3, maybe 4 calls a season, and I try to call those folks back within the hour and just talk them through it and say, hey, you know, we're dealing with this buckthorn and all these species and the negative impact they're having on the landscape. And very quickly, they are good with it. Once they hear that their dog is safe and all those kind of things, they're good with it. So yeah, we've had really amazing luck with the signage, and of course Spectrum and their answering of questions on site is also making a huge difference. So I can't thank them enough. I know that has turned into a big part of the job they probably weren't expecting.
Yeah, we've got a bit of a script down now.
Having knowledgeable professionals definitely helps when you're trying to convey that information to the public.
Definitely.
Nora Lee here asks, is there any monitoring or potential side effects on insect populations with the spraying?
Great question. And maybe I'll throw that back to the OIPC, whose BMPs we're following. I can't speak to that level of science and so forth. I do know that, you know, non-native species don't support as many insects as native species do. So by controlling non-native species on the landscape, we're providing more habitat for insects, which in turn provides more food for birds and all of those good things. So there's a lot of good reasons why you want to have less invasives on the landscape.
This also goes back to using herbicide over mechanical treatment. If we were using mechanical treatment, we would have to like clear paths for the equipment to get in. But with the backpack sprayers, you're just like walking through and like right up to what you want to spray. And it's very targeted. So there is a lot less disturbance by using backpacks and herbicide than there would be with like, I don't know, heavy equipment.
As well, when you're using a herbicide, it generally targets plant parts that are specific to plants and not usually found in insect physiology.
Thank you for the answers there. On the note of the pesticides again, to the O'Keefes would like to know, can you repeat the herbicides that you use in the application?
For sure. Yeah, we use Garlon RTU for the basil application, and then we use Arsenal Powerline and Vision Max. So those are tricloper, imazapyr, and glyphosate, respectively.
Thank you. Have you found goutweed, and how would you control goutweed if you found it?
So the city did address goutweed in a significant project in the Medway Valley because it was impacting a species at risk plant called false rue anemone. But we don't have budget or capacity to control goutweed through the entire Thames Valley corridor. So we're relying on that document we developed with the OIPC that picked out the priority species. So those are the ones we spoke to in the presentation today, and that's our focus on this project.
Thank you very much. I'll only do 1 or 2 more questions, and then I'll direct everybody back to the Q&As, and we'll move forward with our session here. So one of the last questions, was there a letter of opinion applied for?
I don't believe so. I believe that the Spectrum can speak to that. Maybe Ashley would know more, and she's not on the call today. So I know certainly for Phragmites we have those, but for this one, I don't believe it was required.
Thank you. And then last question, wondering what the ballpark cost is for spot spraying herbicide application for relatively small stands of this is Phragmites. For small stands of Phragmites, less than 400 meters square.
Maybe reach out to IPCC and ask them, or one of the conservation authorities. I don't know that I can really speak to that.